Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Carr, for coming to testify before our committee, and I'm really impressed with the work you've already managed to do in the first 100+ days, and really excited about what's to come. And I just want to start off by following up on some of my chairman's questions on the Rip and Replace program, obviously fully funded last December, and I understand that those funds kind of began flowing at the end of April. Obviously, this is really, really important for national security when you talk about the risks that the CCP poses. They're already in our networks, and we know that. You talked about Huawei and ZTE and these threats facing many of our small telecoms. And you mentioned your 28%, I think is the number you said, done here, and you expect to be done about a year from now. Can you just give me kind of an assessment in terms of what you're seeing in securing our networks there? Are there any practical barriers with providers that you're encountering when it comes to implementation here?
Yeah, the largest challenge we had for the longest period of time was the funding shortfall. And since Congress was able to close that, we've moved very quickly to allocate that funding. And at this point, I feel like we're on track now to meet all those marks. But to your point, more broadly, the threat posed by foreign adversaries, and the CCP in particular, is multifaceted. They don't just come at our country through one particular technology vector. And that's why we stood up a new Council on National Security at the FCC. We can see it through providers that we've kicked out of the networks before, like China Mobile and China Telecom. We see the device layer, as you noted, as well as hacking instances. There's been wide reporting on the Salt Typhoon cyber intrusion. I think the public reporting has linked that back to China. And so we need to be exceptionally vigilant across every single technology vector right now.
Right. So you mentioned those operations by the CCP, and obviously they're in our equipment, which poses a serious espionage and cybersecurity threat to our networks. So what are you doing to strengthen the communications infrastructure outside of Rip and Replace, right? So that's one tactic here, but obviously there needs to be more that we're doing to ensure that our communications are safe and secure in this country.
Yeah. One of the actions we're taking that we've actually teed up to vote at the commission level tomorrow morning is there's no piece of electronics that can come into this country without going through the FCC's equipment authorization process. And up to now, that process has been limited to technical reviews. What spectrum does the device operate on? What's its power level? But increasingly, to your point, we're asking for national security checks as part of the devices that are coming in here. We've never actually determined whether individual labs that perform these checks for the U.S. for any device are themselves trustworthy. And so we're adopting a new standard in a vote tomorrow that's going to make sure the labs that do the testing for the devices are not themselves beholden to some sort of foreign adversary. So that's another sort of check that we're taking. And there's additional actions that we can continue to take, including adding new entities to our covered list that we're looking at taking.
What are some of the standards? You mentioned that kind of new approach to accreditation, so to speak. What are some of the questions that you're asking of them to certify that they are not beholden to someone else and are safe to be issuing these clarifications for you?
Yeah, step one is to adopt that standard that they be trustworthy actors, not beholden to a foreign adversary. In the different ways that could play out in application, we've already seen one. So for instance, when we started this process, we found that Huawei was operating a lab. And so we took action to make sure that Huawei labs are no longer part of the FCC-approved equipment authorization process. So if there's entities like a Huawei lab that we determine has sufficient ties to the PLA or the CCP that are risky connections, then we'll now, for the first time, have the ability to take action.
Is there a master list are you compiling working with DOD on this? I mean, obviously they have their blacklist of companies and entities that are directly tied to the CCP. Are you reconciling with them to do that?
This is actually a good question because it ties into another item that we're voting on tomorrow morning, which is effectively similar to a House bill called the FACT Act. And what this would do would bring greater transparency. So it would take every single entity that has an FCC authorization or a license or approval that has sufficiently concerning ties back to China, and or to a foreign adversary, it would publicize that list. And so hopefully if we get that item across the finish line, we will bring more transparency, we'll publicize that list, tracking the approach that Congress here has taken in FACT Act legislation, and that will shine a spotlight on some of these operations.
Yeah, well, certainly we want to make sure that the congruency is there between agencies. If the blacklist at DOD has a company on it, you certainly should be equally as wary as they are. But I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.